Hey, Myles here at Tactical Hyve, and in today's video, I wanted to discuss something that you may have noticed in the industry. Maybe, I don't know, maybe not. And that is the countless, endless debates and disagreements in the industry. And you know, the past 2 or so years that Tactical Hyve has been in existence, I've really immersed myself hardcore in the world of firearms, shooting, tactical training. Trained with lots of different instructors, talked to a lot of people on and offline about different things. And one thing I've noticed is there's just so much. I mean, there's endless opinions and different understandings there. Anyone can debate about anything in this industry. And, you know, most of it to me is more negative in the sense that it's frustrating, it is annoying, it's surprising. And, it's one of the reasons why I started Tactical Hyve before, where I was looking for answers. And the more I really immersed myself, the more I realized there are no black and white answers when it comes to a lot of different things in the shooting world. But as I dove in, you know, there was some trends that I noticed. And for example, when we think about the debates and different topics that happen or that occur among different trainers, institutions, companies, things like that, I noticed 3 trends, and other people share the same sentiments. One is it could be that institutional inbreeding, where if one was taught a certain way all their life, and maybe they were told it was the right way to do it, there's cognitive dissonance where it can be hard to accept any other way of doing it. Are they wrong? Are they right? Who knows? You know, it depends on, we'll dive into that a little bit more, but that causes some debate where if someone was trained one way and told it was the right way to do things, they don't, you know, it's hard for them to learn anything else. And you can tell, usually that's a telltale sign of its institutional inbreeding because they don't really have any good answers as to why. They might have an answer to why, but it might not be a good why, or even worse, their why might be that's the way we've done it forever, right? And then you kind of know that it's that institutional inbreeding. Another thing that we've noticed, and I've noticed, is that there's a lot of arguments about technique. And if you've followed us for a while, you know that technique varies among everybody, right? It'll work for one person, not the other person. It'll work for one situation, not the other situation, so on and so forth. So many variables when it comes to techniques. And it's because a lot of people debate over techniques versus principles. Principles are universal. To give you an example here, my gun is dry here. So the technique would be, do I grip with the finger over here on the trigger guard, you know, or do I grip this way? There's no right or wrong. It depends on who you're asking and what works for you. But both of these follow the same principle of having maximum friction on the gun. Okay, as much contact on the gun. That's just one quick example. Okay, so notice that where 1, institutional inbreeding. 2, the focus on technique over principles. Number 3 is I've noticed that among shooters, competitors, trainers, you name it, the ones who stop learning, I don't know the right answer, or the reason why, I should say the reason why, but they tend to be a little bit more closed off. It could be that because they're not abreast of new ways of doing things or improvements, whatever it might be, but they tend to begin to be closed off, kind of like, it's not institutional inbreeding, but it's kind of like they begin closed off. They're hard to accept other new ways, okay? So those are 3 things I've noticed, and they're not necessarily combined. They're kind of like, they can be taken mutually exclusively, just separate. But as I've gone around even more, I think that it's now important. When I talk to people, I really have to understand where they're coming from, because I now have a bigger picture as to why there's so many debates. And this might save you, the whole point of this video is going to share something that might really save you some time and headache. Because once again, going back to Tactical Hyve, I started this to kind of get rid of the frustration, and you know, I was being annoyed with all this stuff, but then I realized it's not like that way. But I finally found kind of an answer or solution to that issue. And you need to understand where people are coming from. Okay, I'll give you examples here. There are 4 situations, and one of those situations, context is one of what you want to call it, has even more sub-situations here. So if somebody, there's like 4 categories of shooters that I'll call them. 1, they just go target practice. You see these targets here? They just casually do it for fun. Okay, Kate, can you hit that 100-yard target over there, whatever, single shot, whatever. There's no time pressure, there's no running, there's no nothing, there's nothing at all, no pressure. And you're just taking single shots, plinking, target shooting. And if you live within that paradigm or that context, that's going to be one way of doing things. Another would be where kind of target practice too, but there's some kind of pressure, right? Maybe it's time, maybe it's physical. You start running and doing things. Maybe it's no longer single shots. Maybe there's 2 shots, 3 shots at a time, things like that. Maybe you're doing build drills and kind of challenges and contests with your friends, but still kind of stationary, right? But now you've kind of upped it a little bit. That is a second context situation. The third is more dynamic shooting, okay? Anytime you're looking for peak performance. And the way I equate that is competition, where competitors are looking for every single way to really get the most speed and accuracy, all of that stuff, right? That's in a different situation, okay? The fourth context is if you're a defensive shooter, right? A tactical / defensive shooter. That's a different context. And now there's that debate between competition and defensive shooting, and that's not the topic here. And I will say there's, a lot of people argue this will get you killed, this and all that. I train both. I train with a lot of people who train both. It's not that big of a difference. And, shooting is shooting, but there are certain things that come into play. We've created, I think, 2 videos about that, so I'm not going to dive into that here. But I will say that it is still a valid change in context or situation. So in the defensive shooting context or situation, you also have to consider whether or not someone is talking to you from a military background, LE background, or civilian defense context, because it matters and it will be different. If somebody from the military talks to you a certain way, shares techniques and tactics and things like that, but you're a cop, it might differ, versus a civilian situation, it might differ. And I'll give you some examples in a little bit, right? So why is it so important? Because I just named 4 contexts. And to reiterate, your casual shooter, plinking, target practice, take single shots, no pressure, no nothing, just having fun. Somebody who's now doing faster shots, flat range type of thing, but not really a lot of movement. Competitive shooters who are moving, shooting rapid, all looking for peak performance. Then defensive shooters who fall into also military, LE, or civilian perspective, like CCW, civilian perspective. And why is it important to know what situation or context someone is talking from? This is super important. Now, every time I talk to anybody, I have to understand the situation, because it could be that they're right, I'm wrong, but we might be in a different context here. Let me explain. So, I'm dry here. You may have seen people shoot target practice like this. They pull a gun, even with their pinky, something like this, and they break the shot, right? And this breaks a lot of the techniques and principles taught for, let's say, a competition shooter, someone who's looking for peak performance, right? To be able to shoot the fastest and most accurate as possible, right? Let me explain. So let's say your casual shooter does this. They have they're standing up straight, they're using their pinky, they grip it, maybe they're just gripping like this, right? One hand, and they break the shot and they're hitting everything that they want to hit, okay? So let's say the competition shooter, or even like the second context, the one who's shooting more rapid fire, maybe they line with the competition shooter in this particular hypothetical example, where competition shooter goes, you have to have this grip, a 2-handed grip, nice and firm. You have to have a good stance, barrel recoil, all of that stuff, right? But then you have the casual shooter go, no, you don't. Look at this. I'm hitting that all day. One arm, right? One arm. I don't have a stance. I'm just doing this. Don't have a stance. I'm using my pinky. Don't have a 2-handed grip. We don't need a 2-handed grip. I'm shooting easily, right? I'm nailing my target. So who's right? Who's wrong? If you're taking things from the first context, the person is right, because in his world, that's all's needed. You're just plinking, right? But the competition shooter, in their world, those techniques wouldn't work. So the competition shooter is going to tell them, yeah, you're wrong, you're completely wrong, all of that stuff, right? So that's already an area of differences. Both can be right, both can be wrong. It just depends on the perspective. So it's something to consider. Now let's take the defensive shooting world, where there can also be arguments. And one thing that just stands out is follow through, the scan and follow through here, okay? So you may have heard if you've taken classes, after you break a shot, you want to get that last sight picture. There are different people who scan differently after, because the idea is you want to break your tunnel vision. That's a lot of people, kind of after you engage the target, kind of look around. See, basically it boils down to look around, see what's going on, right? Don't get sucked in. So you will have different people talk about different techniques to help you do that, right? Some techniques popular is you break the shot and you go left and you go right. Okay, you kind of scan, okay? After you engage your initial threat. Then there's other schools of thought where break the shot, gun comes in, maybe the muzzle's still down at that initial threat, but you're now looking with your eyes, okay? Another way, right? Another way might be just break a shot and you go down. And I've noticed that it's not 100%. Of course, there's always outliers, but if I were to categorize based on just what I've seen, a lot of the military will kind of scan this way after breaking a shot. Once again, this is not blanket, this is not 100%, but most that I've been, they do this. LE typically do this, okay? And in the civilian world, instructors I've trained with who focus on CCW stuff, they kind of bring the gun in because they want to flag anybody and they're kind of looking with their eyes. Now, of course, there's overlap and things like that, as I mentioned. But here's another area of conflict or debate, because if you're from the military and you're clearing rooms, okay, they're held to, the standards that they're held to are different from LE, different from civilians, and the things that they have to worry about, casualties shooting somebody else are different, right? So if someone was clearing a room in the military overseas, they're on a mission, right, and they've cleared their sector, and after they clear the sector, they're gonna look around with their up, right? And it makes sense because they never know if someone might pop up, because a split second counts. If you are doing this and if you put your gun down, right, and scanned this way, what if someone popped out of nowhere, your sector? That split second is where someone could get you. You might not get your gun up in time, right? But if you had your gun up and you were clearing a room and you were double checking your sector and someone popped up, you have your gun up and you're ready to go, okay? So are they right? Are they wrong? In their context, perhaps right? Because that's their mission, right? But now take a civilian, right? An argument against that would be like, if you train that way and then you are in a mall or something like that, right? Now there's arguments to this and I'll get into it a bit, but let's go into the main point here, where some will say that if you've ingrained this, like if you've trained this way all the time, every time you're a civilian, you start doing that in the real world, that might come out. You might start flagging people who don't mean to be flagged, right? And there's always, I kind of agree with this too, but there's people who go, if you can't do a context change, then you don't deserve to hold a gun. There's that school of thought, right? But it's kind of like, if you don't know you're in a civilian world and you're not supposed to do this, then you shouldn't be having hold a gun. But I digress. But those, there's arguments, debates, always. But the main point is, going back to it, now is the civilian CCW instructor wrong? Maybe not, because they're playing off of, they're not clearing a room, they're not clearing a sector, and perhaps no bad guys, they have to worry about that. It's a different situation. So I want to bring this up because you have to consider all of those situations in context. Because if you don't know where someone is coming from, you're going to be talking to them and they might actually be right and you're wrong because they're talking from their own context. You're talking from your own context. But if you determine the situation when you're talking about, maybe you kind of realize, oh, okay, I got it now. It's because you're talking about this and all that stuff. And one thing to also note, kind of align with everything, is that if you're talking to somebody, so let's say I'm a casual shooter, I don't know anything about defensive shooting, competition shooting, anything like that. And I go, and someone goes to me, oh, you don't really need to see your sights to shoot, whether it's point shooting, indexing, natural point of aim, whatever it is. And if you don't understand that, then this is a particular scenario that applies to you, where you might go, oh no, you always have to look at your sights to shoot. You always have to look at your sights, right? You always have to. And if you don't understand the other context or situation, you don't have an understanding about it, then you might be wrong and don't even realize it. Because a lot of people will tell you, you can be target focused and not see your sights crystal clear and still be perfectly fine, right? So keep that in mind. This is more of a consideration video here, where I think it's important to just understand that, because it's going to save you a lot of frustration. You won't be as annoyed. And I wanted to share this with you guys because with our email list, this is an email that got a lot of good responses, and people for a lot of people too, LE and military, they replied they never really thought about things that way. So hopefully this helps you guys, and share it too, because this could kind of help others in the industry who are constantly debating. Hope you guys like it. If you want to see more videos like this, like, comment, subscribe.